I found it in the most ordinary place. Between the cereal coupons and the school fundraiser forms Claire kept shoved in the kitchen command drawer. It wasn't even a full receipt at first, just a corner of paper with a logo and a clean, expensive typeface. I pulled it out, smoothed it on the counter, and read it like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. Northside Lightworks Studio, rental invoice. Client, Claire Maddox. Date, the previous Thursday. Time, 7 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. That time stamped itself into my head because I could still hear her voice from that night. Casual, practiced, almost proud. Late classes tonight. Don't wait up. I'd texted back a thumbs up while I was packing lunchboxes and trying to keep our youngest from melting down over the wrong granola bar. Stability, I called it. 2 kids, schedules, grown-up responsibilities. You don't interrogate your spouse over a Thursday night class. You trust the routine. I took my phone out and snapped a picture of the invoice, more out of habit than suspicion. Operations brain. Document first. Think later. Then I saw the signature line. Claire's name was there, clean and flowing, like she was signing a client proof. Under it, second line, different pen pressure, sharper angles. Ethan Rhodes. For a second I convinced myself it was an employee signature. A staff member. A manager on duty. Anything. But the invoice didn't say staff. It said secondary party. I stood there in my own kitchen, the house quiet in that mid-morning lull after school drop-off, and felt something shift so subtly it almost looked like nothing from the outside. Just a man holding his phone over a counter. Inside, though, I knew it. The normal version of my family life, the one where the days made sense, where explanations came easily, had already ended. We lived in a quiet Portland suburb where the streets curved instead of intersecting, designed to slow traffic and, I used to think, slow life. Mornings followed a reliable order. Coffee brewed at 6:10. Lunches packed by 6:25. Shoes by the door. Backpacks lined up like they belonged to a different family every night, but somehow always ended up in the same place by morning. I worked as an operations manager for a regional logistics firm. Predictable hours, predictable stress. Problems you could solve with spreadsheets, timelines, and pressure applied in the right direction. Claire did freelance design work out of the house. Branding packages, digital layouts, occasional consulting projects for agencies downtown. It gave her flexibility. It gave us coverage when kids were sick or schools closed unexpectedly. For a long time, it worked. There was no chaos in our marriage. No slammed doors or raised voices. We didn't fight because there was nothing obvious to fight about. Bills were paid. Birthdays were remembered. We attended school events together and sat close enough that people assumed intimacy still lived there. I believed that comfort was the same thing as security. Her decision to take evening courses had sounded reasonable. Necessary, even. The design world changes fast, she said. New software, new techniques. She wanted to stay competitive. I supported it without hesitation. Growth was healthy. Ambition was respectable. I admired that she still wanted more out of her work. The late nights started gradually. Once a week at first, then twice. Sometimes she mentioned a group project, sometimes a critique session that ran long. She'd come home energized, talk quickly, then crash into bed. I chalked it up to stimulation. New environments do that to people. Our kids barely noticed. To them, parents exist in the margins between routines. As long as someone shows up at pickup and dinner appears at roughly the same time, the world feels stable. I made sure of that. Adjusted schedules. Picked up slack without comment. From the outside, our life looked balanced. 2 incomes. Organized calendars. A house that stayed clean enough without feeling staged. Friends told us we were lucky. I believed them. What I didn't see then was how easily structure can hide absence. How smooth surfaces can cover small voids forming underneath. I mistook the lack of conflict for proof of alignment. I didn't notice how often her phone stayed face down, or how conversations drifted toward logistics instead of plans. At the time, I called it adulthood. Responsibility. The natural quiet that comes after years together. Only later did I understand that silence can be maintained, and that sometimes it's being carefully managed. After the receipt, I stopped granting innocent explanations by default. Not because I felt angry, but because anger would have been easier than what settled in instead. What I felt was precision, a narrowing. The same internal adjustment I make at work when a system stops behaving randomly and starts behaving predictably. The details had been there for months, scattered and unimpressive on their own. Claire changed her phone password in early spring. She said it was a security update. I accepted it. Notifications stopped lighting up her screen shortly after. Everything went silent unless she actively checked it. She started taking calls outside, even when it was cold. Said she didn't want to wake the kids. Her schedule grew vague. Not secretive, just unspecific. A shoot. A session. Client stuff. The words were interchangeable, used without anchors. When I asked follow-up questions, the answers were technically sufficient but never expanded. Names were missing. Locations blurred. Timelines softened. She bought a new perfume. Subtle, expensive. Not the kind you wear for comfort. The kind you choose deliberately. When I noticed it, she smiled and said it was a sample from a client gift bag. I nodded. The lie wasn't in the words. It was in how prepared they were. None of this produced rage. There were no spikes of emotion, no urge to confront. What arrived instead was clarity. The kind that comes when probabilities align. I wasn't assembling evidence to accuse her. I was recognizing a pattern that no longer required interpretation. I began to observe my own behavior changing. I stopped asking how her evening went. I stopped offering to stay up and wait. Not out of punishment. Out of accuracy. You don't ask questions when you already understand the answer's function. I noticed how easily she moved between roles. Mother, partner, professional. How nothing ever overlapped. How cleanly she compartmentalized. That level of separation takes effort. Intention. At work, when something doesn't add up, you stop trusting the dashboard and start trusting the trend lines. Individually, her choices meant nothing. Together, they formed a shape I couldn't unsee. I didn't need proof. I didn't need confirmation. The absence of transparency was the confirmation. Trust doesn't erode all at once. It thins, quietly, until light passes through it. By the time I accepted that, I wasn't shocked. I was calm. Calm in a way that told me this wasn't a crisis. It was a conclusion. I didn't confront her. I didn't check her phone or drive past studios or search social media. That kind of investigation would have been about feeding an emotion I wasn't interested in sustaining. I already had what mattered. The understanding. Everything beyond that would have been noise. The decision didn't arrive dramatically. It settled the way fatigue does after a long day, quiet, undeniable. I would not try to repair something that required secrecy to continue existing. Whatever version of us still functioned depended on my ignorance, and I wasn't willing to play that role. Nothing changed on the surface. I still made dinner, still helped with homework, still asked the kids about their days and listened to the answers like they mattered, because they did. I laughed at the right moments. I showed up on time. From the outside, I remained dependable. Inside, I disengaged from the future. I stopped picturing vacations that were more than logistics. Stopped imagining retirement conversations or where we might downsize someday. Long-term plans flattened into short-term responsibilities. Weeks instead of years. Tasks instead of dreams. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. At work, when a project is being quietly phased out, you don't announce it. You just stop allocating resources to it. That's what I did emotionally. I didn't withdraw affection as punishment. I simply stopped investing in outcomes that depended on mutual honesty. Claire didn't notice right away. Or if she did, she misread it. My calm probably looked like contentment. My silence like trust. I became easier to live with, not harder. Less questioning. Less friction. The absence of curiosity can feel like relief to someone guarding a secret. At night, lying beside her, I noticed how my body had already adjusted. No tension, no anticipation, just rest. The kind that comes when you accept that something is already over, even if it hasn't been acknowledged yet. I wasn't preparing for confrontation. I wasn't planning revenge. I was aligning my actions with reality. Detachment isn't coldness. It's accuracy. By the time I fully understood that, I wasn't heartbroken. I was resolved. The marriage still existed on paper and in routine, but the shared future, the one built on assumption and trust, had quietly expired. And once something is expired, you don't consume it out of habit. You dispose of it carefully, without drama, and move on. I started watching without reacting. Not in a suspicious way. In a disciplined one. Observation without interference. The same posture I use when a process is drifting and I need to understand its internal logic before touching anything. Claire became more attentive during that period. Too attentive. Coffee placed on my desk before I asked. Messages checking in during the day. Questions about work that went beyond courtesy but stopped short of curiosity. On paper, it looked like effort. In practice, it felt misaligned. Her timing was off. The gestures didn't connect to the moment. They landed like cover. Her eyes were different. Present when she looked at me, but not anchored. As if her attention had learned to split and was now struggling to recombine. She smiled more. Touched my arm in passing. None of it was excessive. Just noticeable because it hadn't been there before. I didn't respond by pulling away. I matched her tone. Neutral. Accepting. Predictable. People hiding something often relax when the environment feels stable. I let it. That's when I noticed the calendar. Our family calendar lived on the kitchen tablet. Shared access. Color-coded. Kids in blue. Mine in gray. Claire's in green. I hadn't looked closely at her entries in months because there was no reason to. One afternoon, while adding a dentist appointment, I scrolled. Every Wednesday. Same label. Same time block. 6 to 9. Client session. Not recent. Going back 9 months. I cross-referenced without drama. Wednesdays were the days both kids stayed late in after-school programs. The days I'd rearranged my work schedule without thinking twice. The days dinner was simpler. Quieter. Patterns don't accuse. They explain. I didn't screenshot it. Didn't save copies. I didn't need leverage. I needed understanding. The consistency told me more than any message thread could have. This wasn't impulsive. It was maintained. Planned. Integrated. That night, she kissed me goodnight and asked if I was okay. I said yes. And I meant it. Because by then, I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I was watching the structure reveal itself. Once you see the architecture of a lie, you don't need to inspect every brick. I didn't go looking for information. It came to me through a side door, the way consequential things often do. A conversation after work. An offhand remark. I mentioned a name without context, expecting nothing. My friend paused. He was a lawyer. Corporate restructuring mostly. The kind of work that sits downstream from failure. He asked me how I knew Ethan Rhodes. I said I didn't. Not really. Just a name that had crossed my desk at home. That was enough. He didn't dramatize it. Just outline the facts the way professionals do when they're careful not to editorialize. Ethan had been involved in a media studio that collapsed under financial irregularities. Misallocated funds. Investors left exposed. No criminal conviction, but enough civil damage to make his name sticky in certain circles. I didn't ask for documents. I didn't ask for details beyond what was necessary to understand the shape of it. What mattered wasn't legality. It was judgment. The kind of environment Claire had stepped into willingly. Repeatedly. This wasn't a fling built on impulse and confusion. It was proximity to instability. Risk disguised as creativity. A man whose professional footprint ended in debris. And she had tied herself to it quietly, while maintaining the appearance of a structured home life. I drove home slower that evening. Not because I needed time to think, but because I needed to absorb the implications. Betrayal I could categorize. This extended beyond emotion. It touched decision-making. Safety. The perimeter around my kids. People often frame infidelity as loneliness or unmet needs. Those explanations shrink responsibility. They turn choices into symptoms. What I saw instead was alignment. She hadn't drifted. She'd selected. I slept normally that night. Deep, uninterrupted. Because the remaining ambiguity was gone. The situation had resolved itself into something actionable. When personal choices intersect with external risk, you stop negotiating emotionally and start acting structurally. The marriage wasn't just fractured. It was compromised. And compromised systems don't get patched. They get isolated before they spread. I waited until the house was quiet. Not asleep, just settled. The kids were in their rooms. Homework done. Baths finished. The familiar end-of-day rhythm intact. I didn't want emotion bleeding into logistics. Timing matters when you want clarity instead of spectacle. Claire was at the table with her laptop, half working, half scrolling. I stood across from her. No crossed arms. No raised voice. Just stillness. Tell me about Ethan. That was all I said. She didn't ask who I meant. Didn't laugh it off or stall. She closed the laptop slowly, like someone setting something down because they knew they wouldn't need it anymore. Then she sat back in the chair. The room felt smaller. I was lonely, she said. Not defensive. Not rehearsed. Just a statement she'd probably practiced internally enough times that it felt factual. There was no apology attached to it. No justification layered on top. Just the explanation she'd chosen. I didn't argue with it. Loneliness isn't a debate topic. It's a condition people use to excuse decisions they didn't want to own. I nodded once. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. Okay, I said. Then I added, evenly. Then tonight, I'm leaving with the kids. Her reaction was subtle but immediate. Eyes widening. Breath catching. Not panic, calculation. The realization that this wasn't a conversation designed to repair something. It was an update. She started to speak. I held up a hand. Not aggressively. Just enough. I'm not asking questions, I said. And I'm not negotiating. Silence stretched. Not heavy. Just final. She asked where we would go. I told her my brother's place. Tacoma. Temporary. She nodded like someone marking down a logistical note rather than absorbing a fracture. There were no accusations. No raised voices drifting down the hallway. The kids didn't hear anything. That mattered to me more than closure. I packed methodically. Clothes. Chargers. School bags. Favorite hoodies. Familiar objects anchor children when routines break. I made sure they had enough of those. Claire stood in the doorway at one point, watching. Not crying. Just present. I didn't ask what she felt. I already knew what I felt, and that was enough. Before we left, I turned off the kitchen light. Same switch I'd used every night for years. The muscle memory lingered. The meaning didn't. Some conversations don't end with resolution. They end with action. We left that night. No dramatic exit. No last looks. Just bags in the trunk and the quiet weight of responsibility settling into place. The kids were groggy, confused but calm. I told them we were staying with their uncle for a bit. I didn't explain why. They didn't ask. Children accept transitions better than adults when you don't load them with meaning they can't process. The drive to Tacoma was long and dark. Rain came down steadily, the kind that blurs headlights into streaks and makes every mile feel deliberate. The kids fell asleep one by one. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes forward. There was nothing behind me worth revisiting. My brother didn't ask questions either. He opened the door, helped with bags, pointed us to beds. That's what support looks like when it's real. No commentary, just capacity. After that, things moved on their own. Lawyers got involved. Not combative ones. Practical ones. Filings happened. Accounts were reviewed. Timelines documented. I stayed factual. Dates. Patterns. Decisions. Emotion never entered the paperwork. It didn't need to. Claire didn't fight aggressively. There were no surprise motions or dramatic claims. She complied more than she resisted. I noticed how quickly her focus shifted away from reconciliation and toward damage control. That told me everything I needed to know about where her energy had already been invested. The creative partnership she'd centered her new life around unraveled fast. Studios don't survive on ambiguity. Neither do people who confuse momentum with stability. Within weeks, it was over. Quietly. No announcements. No explanations. I didn't feel satisfaction watching it collapse. That wasn't my project anymore. I stayed focused on the kids. Schools adjusted. Routines rebuilt. New calendars replaced old ones. The structure returned faster than I expected. Children adapt when the adults stop pretending. Court rulings came back clean. The house stayed with us. Familiar walls. Familiar rooms. The continuity mattered. I wanted the kids anchored to something solid. Claire and I spoke only when necessary. Logistics. Schedules. Boundaries. There was no hostility. Just distance. The kind that forms when two people stop sharing context. Some endings don't explode. They deconstruct. Piece by piece. Until there's nothing left to argue over. And once the motion stops, you don't keep pushing. You stabilize what remains and let the rest fall away. I didn't feel victory when everything settled. No sense of having won anything. I didn't feel defeated either. Those emotions belonged to contests, and by the end, this no longer felt like one. What I felt was quiet. The kind that arrives when there's nothing left to brace against. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Faster than I did. New routines formed without resistance. Mornings resumed their shape. Coffee at 6:10. Lunches packed. Shoes by the door. The same structure, just recalibrated. Stability, this time, wasn't assumed. It was maintained consciously. The house stayed with us. That mattered more than square footage or equity. Familiar rooms hold memory, and memory gives children continuity. Their laughter returned to the hallways. Their arguments echoed the same way. Life didn't reset. It continued, just without the background tension I hadn't realized was there. Claire and I communicated sparingly. Texts about schedules, pickups, school events. Nothing personal slipped through. I didn't ask how she was doing. She didn't ask how I was coping. That space between us felt appropriate. Earned. I stopped analyzing her explanation for loneliness. At first, my mind revisited it automatically, the way it revisits any unresolved variable. Then it lost relevance. Reasons explain feelings. Actions define reality. I chose to live in the second category. There were moments, of course, ordinary ones. Folding laundry and finding an old shirt of hers. Hearing a song we used to play on road trips. Those moments didn't hurt the way I expected. They registered, then passed. Like weather moving through a cleared system. What surprised me most was the absence of anger. I'd assumed it would arrive late, after the dust settled. It didn't. Anger requires attachment. By the time everything was finalized, that attachment had already been released. I focused on precision instead. Being on time. Being present. Being consistent. Children don't need explanations nearly as much as they need reliability. I made that my metric. Some nights, after the house went still, I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the silence. Not the empty kind. The honest kind. No secrets moving through it. No second narratives running parallel. That kind of quiet doesn't demand analysis. It simply exists. And for the first time in a long while, existing felt sufficient. Some nights the house feels too quiet. Not empty, just unoccupied by anything unnecessary. The kids are asleep. The lights are off. The structure holds without effort. I sit in that quiet and let it exist without trying to name it. I don't replay conversations anymore. I don't wonder what might have happened if different choices were made. That line of thinking assumes outcomes were flexible. They weren't. Things ended the only way they could have once honesty stopped being mutual. The quiet isn't comforting in a sentimental way. It's clean. There's no background calculation running. No second narrative I need to account for. What I see is what's there. I focus on small, repeatable things now. Mornings that start on time. Evenings that end without tension. The kids growing into themselves without having to navigate adult confusion. Those are measurable outcomes. Those are real. Occasionally, memory surfaces. Not sharply, just enough to acknowledge that a chapter existed. I don't push it away. I don't linger either. Memory doesn't need permission. It only needs boundaries. This quiet is honest. It doesn't promise more than it can deliver. And honesty, I've learned, is a stable place to stand. From here, whatever comes next won't be built on assumption. It will be built on what's visible, what's shared, what doesn't require silence to survive. That's a clean place to begin again. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.